All right. Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 3 of United Debates of America. It has been a wild week since our last wild week, and we're going to try to focus our conversation here on what I think has dominated quite a bit of the last week's conversation, which has been the trade war that's been going on between the US and Canada, Mexico, and China. But we're also going to talk about some of the trans and gender related executive orders that the Trump administration has put together. So I'm excited to do it. James, it's good to see you. How you been?
I've been really good. I just took a walk. I'm in DC, and I just took a walk, and you'll be able to hear it. There's a massive anti-Doge, anti-Elon protest, Zach, that's happening downstairs. But I was just down there talking to people. Jim Acosta, of all people, quite literally accosted me, and we had a good little friendly debate about what is happening right now. Plenty to talk about. But yes, another week, I would say exciting for me, perhaps. Certainly a lot of activity. I think we can unequivocally state, and we both agree, there's a lot happening. There's not a dull moment in the past 2 weeks of the Trump administration.
That's for sure. There probably won't be for the next 4 years either. It should be interesting. But first, do you know Jim Acosta? I'm curious as how if this is like just a totally random thing, or if he knew you and is like, hey, let me come accost you.
I think he recognized me from some of the meritocracy stuff that we've done.
Sure.
And he came up to me and just started recording and asking questions.
Wow. Interesting.
So, but it was good. And I was talking to people out there, and, I said, look, this is protected speech, right? As long as there's no violence, you are allowed to have anti-Elon, anti-Doge views. And I am allowed to go out there on the other side and make arguments using fact, logic, and reason, something I try to do on what we're building together, Zach. But I want to be clear that, up until just recently, most Americans could disagree on literally everything, except that we need to be able to agree on disagreeing on everything. And so I'll tell you, there wasn't a lot of that. I was physically threatened a number of times. I made it out alive. I'm, half kidding, but
glad to see you made it out alive. That's good.
I think that's one of the beauties of what we're doing, Zach, is you and I don't agree on much, but we do agree that folks like us need to sit down regularly and talk about things. That's a good thing. We need to talk more as a country.
I agree with you. I mean, look, we definitely don't agree on Doge because I'm with all those protesters out there. Sure. I'm definitely, I know it's not our topic today, but I'm definitely, just like many people on the left, concerned about the level of power that Elon Musk has with pretty much no actual. I mean, I know he's been appointed, what is it, a special employee of the government or something like that. But, the reach that his team is taking and the extraordinary steps they're taking, they promise disruption, and they're definitely offering it. So, I'm kind of in the mindset of let them disrupt and see how badly it goes. My perspective on it is like, look at what Elon Musk has done with X, which is, even the name is a mistake, given that Twitter was probably the most recognizable name in all of social media. But his value has gone down, 82% or something like that ever since he took the company over. So,
well, that's if you want to view it as a financial transaction. I think a lot of people rightly view it as the restoration of free speech. And by the way, that includes speech that you're going to find deeply offensive. I'm actually willing to concede that includes speech that you're going to find deeply offensive. The truth is that in America, whether you like it or not, offensive speech, hate speech even, one, doesn't have a definition, but two, is absolutely protected. We learned about this in the Westboro Baptist case went before the Supreme Court in 2010, that even shouting awful, despicable, disgusting things outside of military funerals was fully protected by the First Amendment. Now, obviously, I don't think that X's success is obviously the proliferation of what some would consider offensive speech. I think that what X has been great at is breaking people out of their echo chambers.
I think it's created an echo chamber. I mean, it's created a right-wing echo chamber. It was sort of like, two separate echo chambers prior to Elon Musk owning it. Now it's just a right-wing echo chamber. Like, I barely ever use it because my feed, no matter what I do, is trying to turn me into a right-wing person. Every single thing I see is like, let me promote this conspiracy theory. It's ridiculous.
What conspiracy theory?
Which one isn't there? I mean, so I had to mute Elon Musk's account just to start, because every single thing I saw was him first, and everything he has.
Well, but he is one of the most followed accounts, to be fair. So naturally, he's the wealthiest person in the world. So a lot of his content is going to naturally be organic.
No, I understand that. But here's the thing. I just backtracking to it. I do think that you have to look at this transaction that he did with $42 billion, whatever it was. That is a financial transaction, and the success of X should be determined not only by its engagement, but by its profitability, which it has dramatically dropped. So that's sort of why I'm looking at this as a one-to-one and going, okay, well, if Elon Musk is trying to do with the US government, what he did with X, that could be much more problematic because unlike X, which is now a private company and most of his decisions and things can remain sort of siloed away from public view, these cannot. And the mass firing of a lot of different people and just the downsizing of, maybe we can argue the relevance of some of these things, but some of the things that he's trying to downsize are relevant, at least to a degree, and they're essentially just getting slashed and people are getting forced out. It's a recipe for a really rough public downfall that, it could not happen, but my expectation is that this is a road that will go poorly for Elon Musk and Donald Trump, but just not right now. It's been 2 weeks. It can't go poorly that fast. But once we start to see, a year later, this really didn't work, and that starts to accumulate, that's what I expect to happen. Just like
or the trajectory could go the way of Tesla or SpaceX or any of the very successful companies that Elon Musk's Tesla stocks up over 1,000% over the past 5 years. So look, we can agree to disagree about. I actually think that what we're optimizing for with X isn't necessarily profitability, although Tesla's been incredibly profitable. Stock performance.
That's a different thing, though. I mean, that's Tesla's a bit more straightforward. It's not as complex as running the government or running a social media platform that has.
I think there's a reason President Biden announced that he was stepping away from the presidential race on X. That came there first. Didn't go on LinkedIn. Didn't go on Facebook. It came to X.
Well, that's reach.
There's reach. There's no question about it, and the reach is unquestionable and is there. And I think that look, I don't think any social media platform is perfect. I think that X does a pretty darn good job. I also think that, to be fair, Zach, and part of the reason why you might be seeing what you perceive to be more right-wing conduct. I don't know that saying the two genders is necessarily right-wing conduct or pushing back on the wasteful spending of taxpayer money. Those generally aren't right-wing ideas. I was actually just reminded a couple of days ago on X of statements that President Obama and former First Lady Hillary Clinton made when they were running for election. They were really, like, the Democrats used to be really tough on illegal immigration. I want to read something real quick, Zach, because this is really, quote, "And if I'm honest with myself, I must admit that I'm not entirely immune to such nativist sentiments. When I see Mexican flags waved at pro-immigration demonstrations, I sometimes feel a flush of patriotic resentment. When I'm forced to use a translator to communicate with the guy fixing my car, I feel a certain frustration."
Who said that? Obama?
Yeah. What do you think about that statement?
I mean, I find it a little bit surprising that that's his perspective, but look,
2009, to be fair, right?
No, it's fair. I mean, look,
the Democrat Party was very different back then. And by the way, you would argue the Republican Party was very different back then. I would argue it was worse back then. I think it's a lot better now. But that's okay.
Yeah, of course. It's got the MAGA stuff going. But yeah, look, I can understand that perspective to a certain degree, but that is nowhere near what we're talking about in the Trump administration, right? And that's, I think, what you're saying when you prefer the MAGA approach to things, because you guys have gone so dramatically the other direction. It's impossible to compare what Obama says there, just sort of like a tinge of sort of nationalism versus just all out mass deportations, reigniting Gitmo so you can put a bunch of illegal immigrants there. That's a totally different set of circumstances. So, yes, theoretically, were Democrats more tough on immigration in the past versus now? To a degree, but I blame a lot of it on the fact that Joe Biden just did such an exceptionally bad job at the border. It sort of changed the national conversation in a way that didn't have to happen. Biden could have been better on the border if he had just kept it from what happened in 2022 and 2023. If you were able to have stopped that in its tracks and kept it, let's say, at the end of Trump's first term type levels, that's where we are now. If he had not had that surge happen at that rate for such a long period of time, I think we would have a very different national conversation about the border. Not only because my perspective on the border also is that most people don't feel the effect of what happened at the border at all. Like, there are certain segments of the population that do feel it in their jobs and their industries and things like that. But most of us have not felt the border crisis. It was more of a media tool to scare people. And I mean, that's what the right has done so successfully with this issue, but they were not going to be able to do that if the levels had not gone up to what Joe Biden allowed them to go up to. So I do think that it's more of a recent thing where Democrats were sort of forced into a corner to act as if they're okay with what was happening because the Democrats just were not solving that problem, which I personally think was a mistake. And it was something that I did not understand why the Biden administration made the choices they did. So I think it's just circumstantial to a large degree. I think a lot of Democrats actually feel, maybe not exactly like the quote you just read from Obama, but I think that they're more in that realm automatically, but they sort of just from the perspective, you could agree with this on the MAGA right. There's quite a bit of just let's all rally around a single way of doing things. The same thing happens on the left. And I think that's kind of what happened here.
Are you happy that border encounters are down 92% since Trump took office?
And 2 weeks ago.
Yeah,
I mean, of course, because he shut the border
down. I mean, but are you happy with that stat? Are you happy
no.
with that?
No, because I don't perceive this as the problem that the right does. Right? Like I think I don't have an issue with even illegal immigration if the illegal immigration is not meant to sneak under the border and never try to get asylum here. I'm all for people coming here and trying to seek asylum because to me, it's more an economic argument than anything. There is an insane amount of data to prove that the economy functions better with more immigrants involved in it, and even the illegal immigrants that are, the right tries to cast it as if they're this big cost to society, but when you actually level everything out, it's either even or a benefit. So I think if we were to just fix our system and allow for that process to be smoother, more immigration judges, better job handling the border transactions themselves, that's what I'd be happy with. So when I hear the border shut down, there's a huge decline in crossing, I see that as like future economic problems. So no, it doesn't make me happy.
Well, but when you say more people are coming into the country, I mean, yeah, if you imported the entire world, there's just one example. I think the most extreme example of that. Mm-hmm. Of course, I mean, you're going to have a ton of cheap labor that goes at the expense of American workers. I mean, we had this debate obviously last week, and that was good. But I just want to point out that there is a legitimate definition to asylum, right? I just want to read this out. This is the U.S. Immigration and Nationality Act. And here's the definition. Okay. A refugee is someone, or rather, hold on, this is, so a fear of persecution related to religion, nationality, membership in a political social group, or political opinion. So your point on economic arguments does not definitionally count toward asylum. I mean, there's tons of people back where my mom is from in central Colombia who would come here on a dime, but not because they're being persecuted due to their religion or their political affiliation.
It's for money.
And so I think I have to answer some tough questions, Zach, about folks in East Baltimore or Appalachia or the Deep South who feel like they're getting screwed with higher rent, worse inflation, they can't find a job, and that people are coming into the country are going to undercut.
But here's the thing. Right? There's no correlation between those things. At least there's not a provable correlation. That's an argument that's made by the right all the time. But I've yet to find any reliable data that proves a correlation between inflation or housing problems or price.
Let's just walk through it. Forget that. Let's just walk through it. How many people live in your neighborhood?
Oh, I have no idea. I mean, I know
roughly. I mean, how big of a neighborhood is it?
Well, I live in Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta's 500,000 people and 6 million people in the suburbs of it.
If we put 100,000 more people in Atlanta and gave them housing vouchers, what would happen to housing prices in Atlanta?
I don't know. It would depend.
Well,
I mean, there's no guarantee it would go up. I have no idea.
Why wouldn't it? Because the demand for housing is going up and the supply is fixed. So,
but this didn't happen. All these folks didn't. We didn't give hundreds of
10 million people came into the 10 million. Well, they sure did. I mean, they got free.
How many?
It depends on where they went. I mean, in New York City and Chicago, they absolutely got free housing.
But how much? How many people did though? That's the thing. It's like I understand that's happened, but there's
only a finite amount of housing supply. So as you bring in new demand,
there's a ton of open housing at this point. But I want to have that question answered because that's an important question. I understand that's happened, that these folks have been given free housing. How many? That's an important question. And without the answer being a extremely large amount, then it doesn't affect housing prices the way that you're claiming it does.
Well, hold on. If 100,000 people move into Atlanta, whether or not they got the free housing, that still affects home prices because they need somewhere to live.
But they're not buying houses. It's a difference between a rental and buy. Like this is where it gets. This is
both.
like the issue is
when I say house prices, I mean both rental and buying. I don't.
Well, no illegal immigrants are in these circumstances are buying houses. They're.
Well, Kamala Harris wanted to change that. That's okay. She did want to provide. She
wanted to provide first-time home buyer assistance, but you still have to qualify. I mean, the qualification metrics are much more challenging than a person who doesn't even have citizenship in the country. So, look, that's a challenge in and of itself. But this is the issue that I have with how the right approaches these types of things. It's too general. Are we talking, which type of housing are we talking about? Which neighborhoods are we talking about? What is the market doing outside of just the pure demand from a certain segment? These are questions that need to be answered to fully understand what the actual impact is. And the questions are never answered.
Well, let's answer them.
I'd love to hear it. I'm asking you.
Let's talk about them.
Okay,
Let's talk about them.
So tell me how many folks in these cities, New York City and Chicago, give me a raw number on how many of them were given free housing. That's the sort of information I would need to know in order to know, okay, did this have a macro effect, or is it just a tiny micro section of the economy?
So are you familiar with the migrant hotels in New York City, the old Roosevelt Hotel, for example?
Yeah.
Familiar with those? Okay,
Sure.
those exist, right?
Yeah, but that only houses like a couple hundred people. It's not a huge number.
It's a couple thousand. There was 50
Even
to
a couple
100,000
thousand. There's
people.
millions of people in New York, so it's a tiny number. So that's exactly my point.
Right, but it's not a tiny number if you were that family who was displaced, who can't access housing. So I'll give you an example.
Who's displaced though?
Well, I'll just give you one example. I'll give you one example. If you were a family in Queens, a pipe burst in your home, and you didn't have a place to stay that night, that week while the repairs were happening. If you walked into one of those migrant hotels, the Roosevelt Hotel, and said, pipe burst, dad's a bus driver, mom's a teacher, need somewhere to stay for the week, what would happen, Zach?
You go to another hotel.
No, but Zach, my point is,
no, but you're defining a set of circumstances where the answer is simple.
Free hotel was free for whom?
Well, who cares? That's my point. Like, I think a lot of these issues are like,
who was the free hotel was for whom?
It's for illegal immigrants, but that doesn't change that family can just go down the street to a different hotel.
No, but
it's not like the whole market falls apart.
But the hotel they would have gone down the street to would have cost money. The free hotel is free, but it's only for illegal immigrants.
Why should they get free stuff?
Great. So why should illegal immigrants get free
I'm
stuff?
not arguing they should. That's the point.
Okay, can we get you? Let's find a point.
You can get me on record by saying I don't agree with that 100%. But that's not what I'm
listen,
about.
If we can get that on record, I want to hold on.
I have no issue.
Tuesday, February 4th, 2025.
I'll expand on that.
Are you ready?
I'll expand on that 100%.
Illegal immigrants should not get free housing in America. True or no true?
True. I don't think that they should.
Well, I'll take a win where it is. Let's just take that win. I agree.
but hold on. But the issue that I have is that's not the topic we're talking about. We're talking about the macro effect on housing prices, because all I heard from the right, especially during the election, was if you solve the border issue, then you're going to solve the cost issue with housing. And I see zero correlation. So what you've just described, I don't agree with the free housing for illegal immigrants.
Do you see 100% correlation? Do you see 100% correlation?
What? Between what?
Between house prices and illegal immigration or migration patterns. Okay.
No.
Neither do I.
Do you see even 2% correlation though? That's the level where I get to. It's like, when does it matter? I don't even think it's at 1%.
Okay. First off, I mean, I don't think home prices in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho responded to the migration patterns at the southern border because those folks didn't go to Coeur d'Alene. So again, I'd have to look at these studies, but I would have to. So let's just set up the study here. Okay. Former econ college dropout. So here's how you would set up the study. You would look at the top 10 cities that migrants went to. Yes or no?
No, because that doesn't give you an accurate view of the entire country. If you want to do it to the accurate, that would just give you a view of the most populous areas.
Of course, it's not going to affect people in places that the migrants didn't go unless there were spillover effects.
But that's the thing. The housing market as a macro is the whole country.
Well, no, the housing market is where you live locally. I don't personally care about the
individual
housing
market.
You don't care about the housing market in Phoenix. I don't care about the housing market in Atlanta.
Why?
Well, no, because we don't live there. It doesn't affect us.
But they're all together, because the thing that really drives it is interest rates. And illegal immigration has nothing to do with that.
Interest rates had to go up because of the Biden inflation. That's a separate story.
No, it's not Biden's inflation. It's global inflation from the pandemic.
But what I would say is agree to disagree on that. That's an entirely different conversation.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten to the trade war yet, but
no,
we're inching our way there.
My point is that I don't take consolation in that because other countries had inflation that somehow made it okay for us
Every country had inflation.
Well, I don't. So there's a differentiation between core inflation and headline inflation.
Sure.
We had a massive negative supply shock that was actually fueled by policy around the American Rescue Plan. Let's not forget, Zach, that unemployment had been cut in half from 15 down to 6% by the time the American Rescue Plan was signed. We pumped $2 trillion of stimulus into the economy.
Trump did $3 trillion though.
Right. But again, the stimulus matters, right? The stimulus matters when you put it, the context, right, matters when you put it in. So Trump put that money in.
But having to print money was because of both of them, not just because of Joe Biden.
Right. But it's like, when do you take morphine? Do you take morphine when you have a broken leg? Or you take morphine? Do you want to get high at Coachella? The effect is going to be different. The morphine
but that's not the circumstances Biden faced. Yes, he faced more.
Was the economy worse when Trump did his stimulus than it was under Biden?
Definitely. Definitely.
Okay, so the stimulus was more warranted under Trump than it was under Biden.
I'll give you that 100%.
So okay, perfect. So we have an agreement on that. Again, longer conversation to be had. But what I would say is, and I'm going to look at what studies exist on this particular point, is no, was there 100% correlation between 10 million people coming across the border and housing prices? No, because interest rates, affordability, all of that. I don't think there's 0% correlation. I don't think that's honest. I don't think that's fair.
No, I don't either, but I think it's like 1%. Like, I mean, okay. I'm throwing a random number.
That's fine. What we will have to do is we will have to look this up on our own and then come back.
Yeah.
But again, I also think about that the common sense, right, is that you have a neighborhood of 100 people and then 50 people move in. Yeah, home prices, whether that's effectuated through rental prices or housing prices of the home itself, those things are going to go up. Econ 101, Gregory Mankiw, my first year of college, when you've got demand going up and supply is not responding, Mr. Kimball, Dr. Kimball, Professor Kimball, what happens to prices?
Of course. I mean, that I give
you that. But why would this be the exception then?
Because the hypothetical you're providing is not an actual representation of reality. That's the problem I have. They're not neighborhoods where they double in population. I mean, maybe there's a couple in the entire country. I can't say for sure there's none. But if you're looking at the average American neighborhood,
Springfield got quite a few.
Sure, but if you're looking at the average American neighborhood, that's nowhere near what happened. It would probably be one or fewer people compared for every 100. So this 50 for 100 is just a ridiculous number. So that's why it's like, yes, if you want to create a hypothetical where you're infusing a ton of new people into a market and the supply is not there to meet that demand, sure, you're going to have a huge price challenge. But I would be hard pressed to find more than 3 places in the whole country where that is a one-to-one.
I think this is a good study for Zoria. I think this is, we're going to get a pull on our head of research. We're going to sit down. We're going to do this study, Zach. This is good.
I like it. I would love to. I'm a data guy. You know that.
You're a data guy. And let's just be completely honest. If we could show this in a rigorous, impartial way, are you willing to change your mind on this?
100%. That's who I am. If you show me data on it that can show me a macro effect.
And, you know, despite the fact we've known each other for a little bit of time, I actually didn't know that you didn't support the illegal immigration, the free housing for those immigrants. So that's actually good to know that we agree on that particular point.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I'd have to I'd have to look at the details for how long. Like, I don't support it for a very long period of time. Like if in an ideal world, it would be, okay, you have an asylum claim, you have 6 months before you go to see a judge. Maybe for that 6-month period, I'd support it. But if it's just like open-ended, no. I'm a conservative Democrat, so I don't look at this and go just hand out money to everybody, especially illegal immigrants. I'm not dying to do that. I think most people would probably agree that, I mean, I'm sure I just think probably maybe 20% of people would disagree with what I'm saying, but I'd probably 80 are probably on board with you and I on this one.
Copy.
And
okay.
Let's move on.
we obviously we are almost 30 minutes in and 22 minutes in. And we've on our agenda is the trade dispute and a particular executive order from Trump on transgender, so-called, I have to put that there. Again, I'll just read the exact thing. Quote, "You'll take issue with this. That's okay. Protecting children from chemical and surgical mutilation." Executive order.
I take issue with it.
But all right, so why don't we start with trade? So we started the weekend off with President Trump making statements, making demands of Canada and Mexico, and then saying that tariffs were going to go into effect, 25% tariffs were going to go into effect if Canada and Mexico did not do what they needed to do with respect to the border. Turns out Canada and Mexico did what they needed to do with respect to the border. There's actually pretty material changes. The U.S. and Canada creating a joint strike force, the appointment of a fentanyl czar for Canada, 10,000 Mexican troops, 10,000 Canadian troops to secure both the northern and southern borders. So let me just ask you before we talk about the trade conflict, where I know your particular views are you happy with the measures that Prime Minister Trudeau and President Sheinbaum of Mexico put in place in response to Donald Trump's demands?
I think they're wildly misunderstood. I think that Trump got rolled super hard here, and the right does not see it. Let's take 2 particular examples. Not China, Canada already this $1.3 billion deal that they're saying they're going to put together to not have the tariffs imposed. They announced that last year. It's not a new thing. And Trump didn't know that. And Trump took it as his own win and said, hey, look, they're announcing this new plan because of what I did. Nope.
What deal is this?
$1.3 billion to have the fentanyl, all the stuff you mentioned, but the fentanyl czar, the putting, I don't know the exact, putting all the things in place they need to put in the border to stop the flow of fentanyl, even though it's 0.2% of our.
But to be fair, Canada, so the fentanyl czar was you said it was created before this?
The $1.3 billion package they agreed to that inspired Trump to stop these tariffs was last year. They did not do it in response to what Donald Trump was doing right now. They did it last year.
Had any of the money been spent? Had they been appointed a fennel czar?
No.
Okay, so that's kind of an important. But
they haven't done it yet. I mean, that still hasn't happened.
Cheap. So they hadn't done it yet.
Well,
that's
still haven't.
Cheap.
They still haven't.
But again, that's why Trump has said in 30 days. In 30 days, what's going to happen, Zach?
No, in 30 days the tariffs will go into place. But my point is,
I guess my point is that the money hadn't been spent. They actually put out a press release and hadn't done anything. So Trump.
We do the same thing with most of our programs. We don't just immediately start spending on programs. Sometimes it takes years before they actually go into place. But regardless of that, it's something. I look at it and go, well, Trump clearly didn't know that was an element of this because he's touting it as. I mean, he could know and be lying, but he's touting it as if it's something that he did, where he had nothing to do with it. It was something they were already going to do. They may or may not enforce it now based on him.
10,000 troops, though.
I don't know about the Canadian 10,000 troops, but the Mexican 10,000 troops, that is because Mexico already has 15,000 National Guard troops on the border, and they're not saying it's additional 10,000. They're just saying, yeah, we'll send 10,000 there. So that's where he gets rolled. Essentially, Mexico and Canada are doing things they've already done, and he's acting like he made them do it, which is not accurate.
Well, so again, what I would say is my reading of what Mexico has put out is there are 10,000 additional troops that are going to be going to the border, that Trump has 30 days to assess what Canada and Mexico are doing. I can understand why, something that was announced beforehand, but the operative word there, Zach, is going to be announced. If Canada has yet to appoint a fentanyl czar, if they've yet to spend the money that they've announced, and Trump gets them to spend that money, that's a good thing, right?
Can I ask you a question about that, though? So
sure.
When you look at the fentanyl seizures, right, it's only 0.2% come from the Canada-Mexico, not the U.S.-Canada border. So is the juice worth the squeeze to be trying to get a 0.2% improvement? It seems like a waste of time. And the same question could be asked of Mexico, and I want you to respond to both of these. If you look at the facts, 90% of the fentanyl that comes over the border is from American citizens in legal ports of entry. So at best, we're addressing 10% of the fentanyl problem with this, and that's probably overinflating the number. And one of the sides of it is only 0.2%. So it's a fractional benefit. Does that satisfy you?
It does, and let me explain why. The first is the data is extremely imperfect on this, right? I don't know how any government could precisely know what is or what is not. By definition, if it was smuggled through, we never know what it actually was.
Arrests and convictions. I mean, that's what we can.
Yeah, I don't think that's particularly good. I think there's a ton of conduct, by the way, that doesn't end up getting arrested or end up getting convicted. And we've certainly seen that in a number of large cities over the last couple of years. But in any event, I think we would agree that this is not as simple as counting people in a room. This is about stuff getting smuggled by highly sophisticated narco traffickers. So the data is imperfect, number one. Number two, the point about U.S. citizens, my understanding of the data is that most of the fentanyl that makes its way across the southern border goes through legal ports of entry. Yes. Right. Not necessarily through U.S. citizens. There are U.S. residents. There are Mexican citizens. Again, the data is imperfect there on what that means.
I can just tell you, it's 89% U.S. citizens. It's not just the legal ports of entry. It's also U.S. citizens.
Okay, I'll concede that point for a moment. How does Mexican troops not help with that? If you've got checkpoints that are happening before folks are getting to the border, by the way, the U.S. citizens in question are maybe people who are Mexican nationals who became U.S. citizens, folks on the ground. I don't know. Whether you're an illegal immigrant or a U.S. citizen and you're trafficking in fentanyl that's killing young people, it doesn't matter to me. You don't get a pass if you're a U.S. citizen and you're bringing fentanyl into the country.
Of course not.
I guess the point is that here's the truth. Whether they're a U.S. citizen or not, they were in Mexico. They made their way northward, and so additional Mexican troops at additional Mexican checkpoints would do what, Zach?
No, look, I understand your point. It's not nothing. That's kind of what you're getting at, is that it's an impact, and sure, it is. Having more Mexican troops there is going to be helpful. It's going to maybe stem the tide of a small percentage of this problem, but to me, the juice isn't worth the squeeze if you're threatening a very important and impactful trade war, essentially.
Well, they clearly think it is because they did it.
Well, they already conceded.
They conceded that
what are they really conceding
to do?
Of course, but what are they like? In the end, if I'm Mexico, that Trump's not getting very much for it. So Mexico gets off easy. They're just putting 10,000 troops in.
I mean, that's a lot.
But what are they? Mexico's not losing anything; they're just reallocating troops. Like, it's not like this massive win. It's like, okay, if that's all I got to do, sure, I'll do it. And we already have a ton of people there anyway. So like, I don't look at it as this like, oh, look what Trump did.
How will we define a win 1 year from now? How do we define a win with respect to these actions in fentanyl?
I think that you have to look at, the data of,
fentanyl deaths go down next year.
Define it do have to be like down, not like, look, 2%, 3%.
Fentanyl
like
deaths are down 10% next year. Is that pretty good?
It's okay. It's not worth it in the end to me.
10,000 deaths, Zach, with all due respect.
I mean, look, I understand
10,000 people.
This may be seen as insensitive, but I look at this and go, there's far more than 10,000 people that are going to be tremendously adversely affected if there's a trade war between the U.S. and Mexico and Canada. And I would much rather keep our economy intact.
So I disagree. I think 10,000 people losing their lives is obviously far worse than a car company having to pay a tariff for a car coming across the border.
I think these people are very high risk to lose their lives regardless. I mean, let's be realistic. These are drug addicts most of the time. And the likelihood that they're not just going to go some other direction with it is low. So, I understand what you're saying. And I'm not saying that there's not humanity in that answer, but I think that the issues that this is really smashing up against are much more important than trying to reduce fentanyl deaths by a small percentage. If we could go, hey, we can cut it in half. That's a guess. Like if it is 10,000, sure, maybe my mind's more open to it.
Fentanyl is the deadliest drug available on the streets of America.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's never been cheaper to access fentanyl. That has to do directly with the supply, not just coming from Mexico and Canada. We can talk about China in a moment, which got hit with tariffs, and they didn't step down. They actually responded with tariffs of their own.
Correct.
In any event, it has never been easier to get a cheaper, deadlier drug like fentanyl on the streets. And so as someone who lost someone in my family to this poison on the streets, I can tell you that there are people today, Zach, who are losing their lives, who would have had a second chance at rehab, who would have maybe not gone down that dark path had the $5 counterfeit fentanyl pill not been as easily accessible. And so I agree, there's certainly a demand issue here, but the supply issue is that cheap, deadly drugs, the likes of which we've never seen before, are pouring across the border into communities. And I wrote an article about this for the Free Press, Barry Weiss's outlet, a year ago, titled "That Fentanyl is Killing America's Kids." And we talk about young kids like Luke Emanuel, 13 years old, not a drug addict, not someone who had ever overdosed before, 13 years old, had a root canal, went on Snapchat. Someone who had sold him weed in the past sold him what he thought was a fake what he thought was a real Percocet, turned out to be a fake counterfeit Percocet that was made with fentanyl. And so when I think about fentanyl users, yes, percentage-wise, Zach, you're right. Most are current addicts, just sad to say. But there are a lot of kids out there. 24 kids a week in America are losing their lives. And so I do think we have to really look and say 10% is 10,000 people. That's massive.
Yeah.
Those are real lives. And so the truth of the matter is that we clearly, Mexico and Canada could have done more, should have done more, and agreed they could have and should have done more, and are now in the process of doing more. Now, look, we're 48 hours in. We are going to see what happens with Canada's fentanyl czar. We're going to see what happens with the Mexican troops if they're doing what. By the way, this is in our best interest. It's in our best interest to not have drugs pouring across the border. True or no true?
I mean, I object to the word pouring across the border. I mean,
coming across the border.
Look,
but it doesn't. But what I'm saying is that Mexican troops.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Still protect the Mexican side of the border, even if U.S. citizens are smuggling drugs.
Absolutely. Right? Look, they
can do checkpoints.
Yeah, they could, of course. But look, first of all, I want to say I didn't know about your family member. I'm sorry to hear about that. That's not, it's a scourge that's affected many families all over the country. So I'm not trying to downplay that side of things. My perspective on this is there are better ways to solve that problem. Threatening other countries with trade wars, to me, is not the correct remedy for this problem.
War.
Of course it is. If Mexico doesn't, here's the thing. Mexico didn't have to give up much for this. If the next step they're not willing to do, and then the tariffs just come right back, which we both know that's what Trump is going to do. He's going to hold this over everybody's head until it doesn't work. I mean, it's very likely. So far, he's seen some, in his mind, success from it. So he's going to keep using it. That's what Trump does. He just uses the same tactic over and over and over again until it blows him in his face. That's why he's gone bankrupt so many times. But regardless, I think that I'm not trying to say that fentanyl is not a problem. I'm trying to say that the threat of a trade war is not the primary way to solve this problem. There are many better ways to do it.
What is the better way to solve this problem, Zach?
Frankly, I think that the one thing I can agree with the Trump administration, at least like the general gist of it, that I think is a better approach, is running more joint missions with the Mexican military against cartels. That is where I can start to see some more direct benefit, where it's like, okay, we're not going to try to screw up everybody's economy and have everybody pay more for stuff. We're going to directly go after in tandem with the Mexican government, not on our own and going into a sovereign country. And, pretty much what Hegseth and Trump seem to be hinting at potentially happening in the future. But if there's joint missions, military missions to take out cartels, I'm all for that.
Would you support Trump ordering a drone strike on Mexican cartels? Yes or no?
Not without, if the Mexican government okays it, then yes. But
are you against all drone strikes in other countries if the government does not okay it?
It depends on the circumstances.
Pakistan. But if we have a terrorist in Pakistan, do we need to let the government's permission first?
No, because Pakistan is not an ally.
Okay. I would argue that Mexico and their cartels, I would not argue, it's just the fact. Mexican cartels have killed way more people than Pakistani terror groups.
Sure, of course.
And so what is
Mexico's an ally? That's the difference. Mexico's an ally.
I don't know. I mean, why is Mexico an ally?
What do you mean? They're a tactical ally in so many different ways. They're our neighbor.
Why?
We're not going to. What do you mean? Why?
Well, I'm saying hold on, but I understand why that's the the.
Are you saying we shouldn't be allied with Mexico?
I think we should be allied with anybody that wants what's best for our citizens, but allowing narco traffickers to send cheap drugs across the border and produce them internally with precursors that are coming from China, of all places, that's not exactly ally behavior. Say what you want about Pakistan. They're not killing 100,000 people a year. They're not sending fentanyl into the streets of Baltimore or Philadelphia. That's the truth.
There's steps in between it, though, right? Like,
well, I know that Mexico says all the right things, and I know that there are neighbors. I guess my point is, and let's just go to this point about Trump and the drone strikes, is why, and I mean this sincerely, why are you okay with Trump ordering a drone strike in Pakistan but not in Mexico to kill people that are killing us?
Because they're enemies. I'm very, I'm
Who's more of an enemy, the Mexican drug cartels or a Pakistani terror group?
I'm not talking about the specific target. I'm talking about the country in which they're operating, right? That's the difference to me. Sovereignty matters to me. And I don't think it matters so much to Trump, and that's probably why he stands where he stands.
It probably doesn't matter to Trump because he's upset about 100,000 people dying from drug overdoses.
But it should matter to him. That's the thing about Trump's approach.
Why should sovereignty matter to him when Mexico is respecting the sovereignty of our people by letting them be poisoned?
They're not like you think. Act like the Mexican government.
The Mexican government is thoroughly
says, "Come on in." Go. The Mexican government is not capable.
They know where the cartels are, Zach.
Of course they do, but they're not capable. It's like the cartels aren't like these just feckless losers. They're going to fight back. It's not a simple thing to get rid of cartels. You can't just drop a bunch of tactical nukes on them and then they go away.
Maybe
cartels
they
have existed,
should.
but they can't. And they do the same thing that happens in the Middle East, where they embed themselves within communities where there's a lot of danger. So, but it's like you're pitching it like it's this simple thing. It's extremely complex for anybody to do this stuff, and that's why I support joint operations between Mexico and the United States to take this on. And that's where the U.S. government.
What if those operations, 30 days in, they don't want to cooperate? It's rife with corruption. What happens then?
Well, then we don't do it.
So then
I respect the sovereignty of allies.
Okay, so let me just give you one hypothetical example. You've got a Mexican cartel lab, isolated. There's 100 workers there. A shipment of fentanyl that's going to go to Phoenix, 100,000 doses of fentanyl. Trump has a clear line of sight, orders a drone strike. Do you support that, yes or no?
No.
Why?
Not without the Mexican government giving the okay.
Well, but this is really fascinating, Zach. Why?
Because they're a sovereign country. We can't do that. They're a sovereign ally.
What about the 100,000 drugs that are coming into Phoenix? We're a sovereign country. They're not doing anything about that.
But there's other ways to stop that from happening. Than
how would you stop them? Well, right now it's
stop them at the border. We're putting all this money into border infrastructure. Stop them there.
Well, I agree. I think that is, look, that's the last line of defense is the border. But there is a world in which we can go upstream. Look, we don't want to have to do this. It is something that we would be forced to do. These are bad people. These are sick people. But it wouldn't
stop them. That's the thing, though. The cartel.
They're sick people, right?
No, I agree with that. I'm not trying to reach my arm around the shoulder of the cartels and go, "You guys are great. They suck. It's terrible." But the point that I'm making is, this is an extraordinarily complex set of circumstances, and cartels are not like 16 guys with a bunch of money. It's hundreds of thousands of people across many different networks. It's extremely embedded. So it's not like something we can just simply fix and just go, hey, Mexico, fix it. They can't fix it. They don't have the manpower to fix it. That's why I support the US and Mexico working together to have joint operations to do this, because we can use our substantial manpower to help them change the tide. But we're not doing that. Instead, we're going, we'll just drop a bomb on them. It's like, it's not going to be that simple. It's the challenge I have with almost everything Trump suggests, and the right at this point, the MAGA right at least suggests. It's this oversimplification of just do this. It's like, never is it as simple as just do it. You can't just do it. It's extraordinarily complicated, and there are so many layers.
Shut down the border. It worked out pretty well.
That's easy though, but just because we control.
Why didn't Biden do it?
I don't know. It's a great question. I've been against that from the jump, but that's not really the point. Like I think that Biden did a horrendous. That was the biggest failure of Biden's presidency outside of. Well, I think it was his second biggest failure. His biggest failure was running again. That was a huge mistake. But regardless, it was a big failure. I don't think even many Democrats could argue that Biden did a good job there. So, look, shutting down the border is a simple thing. It's just, as we've seen, it's a stroke of a pen. It's not a stroke of a pen to take out cartels. It's complicated. There's many levels to it. And I think we couldn't ever take them out. It's impossible. It's the same thing as saying we could destroy ISIS. We never destroyed them. They still exist. We just neutered them. We can neuter cartels to a certain
neutered ISIS.
I agree. He did a good job at that. I'm not going to take away from that. He did a good job. And he can do a good job here too. But doing it the wrong way won't work. And I think what you guys are pitching is the wrong way.
Well, respectfully disagree. We've had joint programs with the Mexican government going back 50 years. Drug deaths have never been higher.
That's DEA stuff. That's not military. This is a different thing.
Well, let's see what the Mexican government does with these 10,000 troops. I applaud President Sheinbaum for doing that. Again, not of her own volition, but because of President Trump demanded it. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, we both want the same thing. We want our cities to not be right with all this poison, right? We want that, right, Zach? We want the same
Absolutely.
thing. We want overdoses to go down. We don't want young kids to be, it's like the old thing. It's, during Prohibition, right? Alcohol was frequently adulterated, right? Mm-hmm. And so you didn't turn to the person who had a beer during Prohibition, who had an adulterated beverage and who died, and said, well, you shouldn't have had alcohol, right? Just like a kid, has a Heineken today and he was 17 years old and he died for whatever reason because it was adulterated. Well, you shouldn't have had alcohol. Like, clearly there's an issue here. And I think in America, you should, as a kid, as a teenager, you and I were teenagers at one point in time, we're allowed to make mistakes and not die as a result of them. And that's what the fentanyl issue means. And I'll just say, you and I are going to be in Jacksonville together, not this coming weekend, but the following weekend. Yep. Maybe an opportunity actually to bring some folks out who may be local to Northeast Florida or Central Florida to have them come out. We're going to do a live episode. We're also going to have a debate with you and some of our Incubate debaters.
I'm excited about that.
I'm thinking about the format, Zach, but similar to Jubilee. But think of it this way. 2 folks in the middle. Then you've got a team of 4 behind you. Mm-hmm. And then you can swap out, but you're on the same team. So it's not like, I want to raise the flag because I want to replace Zach. But you could be replaced and your foil on the other side could be replaced, and you get to collaborate with your team and take breaks. What do you think about that? Just generally.
I think it. That's interesting. I like it. I think it's a cool idea.
And so people a little bit younger than you, not to date either of us, but a little bit younger than you, having some good debates. And you saw some of the topics that I showed. These are going to be good ones.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about it. I think it's a lot of good stuff. I think the majority of it we probably disagree on, but I think there'd be a couple spots you'd be surprised where I think we might have some overlap. But it will be fun. Look, I don't even want to say how old I am because now I start thinking about how long ago high school was, and it's like, oh my god. But yeah, it'll be good to see. I used to. Debating in high school was my favorite thing. I was never actually on the debate team, but I used to be in, different political classes and things like that. And I was the guy who wouldn't shut up. So, I obviously I love what I do now. It's very similar, but I am excited.
It is debate. It is debate.
Yeah. Of course. This is exactly.
Well, this is literally debate. But if you think of debate as making arguments and clashing with other viewpoints, that is literally what you do. From the left, I do it from the right. Yep. I do it in an impartial way. You'll know that when we get together for Incubate Debate, that I'm really serious about being impartial in that capacity. I don't talk about my politics. I'm not going to be debating. I'm simply there to facilitate the debate, to introduce folks and to organize it. Yep. But I think it's important that, we are vocal about our politics and we don't apologize for it. And we just entertain discussions like this. Yep. We covered a lot of ground with Doge and with Elon and X and all of that, a little bit on a ton of the trade war stuff. Yep. I think maybe best actually to leave the debate about President Trump's order on children and quote chemical and surgical mutilation, because that's going to be that's going to be a long one.
We can save it for the in-person debate. I'm fine with that.
We actually may do that. We could do it. We could do it in person, and then you and I, in our podcast capacity, could do a live episode, and then maybe take questions from students. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
That's cool. I like that. I think it's interesting because, yeah, I mean, it's a very important topic. I definitely want to dive into it at the level that it deserves. I know some people that are affected by these executive orders personally, so it'll be interesting to be able to dive into some of that stuff because it's important. But I think on a social level, this definitely is an interesting question that. It's funny. My mom and I are similar in terms of our political persuasion, but this is one of those issues where, like, even talking to her because she's in her 70s, it's a generational thing. I think a lot of people don't fully understand the details. So I'm curious to see where some folks stand just in terms of their functional understanding of what trans even is and, the ideology around it. Because I think that me personally, I think many people on the right have a fundamental misunderstanding of what trans people think about their identity and how their identity works with sexuality. I think it's a complicated thing that is being hyper oversimplified by the right. So I'm curious to get into that side of the debate as well as talking about the specific executive orders. But I think that's going to be an important part of trying to understand one another and see each other's perspectives. Because for me, it's a psychological issue that is important to understand the full scope of, and not just go, hey, there's two genders. It's like, it's not that simple, and I think the right does think it's
I think it's that simple, but it's okay.
It's not.
I think it is that simple. Well, and I also think that gender is a social construct. It's very clearly defined that way. My view is that there are 0 genders, 2 sexes, and infinite personalities, and that just because you're a guy and you don't like box cards and you don't like boxing and you don't like football doesn't mean you're any less of a man. You are beautiful. You are special the way you are. And the same goes for women. I think a lot of, and this is a separate, maybe this is perhaps just a preview for a later episode. Yeah. But I think the idea, and you can look at I go to primary source documentation for stuff like this, HRC, this, that, and the other, forget it. Let's look at the DSM-5 and what it says. This is the prescribing manual, right, Zach? That psychiatrists will use to prescribe gender dysphoria, which is the medical condition for transgenderism. There's literally, I'm going to read this to you right now because my phone's about to die, but DSM-5 PDF. I want to read this.
Just as you look this up, I do want to just make it clear that the American Psychological Association clearly says that transgenderism is a real psychological condition. It's not something that is made up or conjured up.
Gender dysphoria. This is the diagnosis.
Really used to, gender dysphoria is sort of not.
Doesn't well, but this is how they. I'm looking at the DSM-5 right now. It's called gender dysphoria in children. So I just want to read this out. So these are markers that psychiatrists, MDs, would use. This is the manual to identify a child as transgender. Quote: a strong preference for the toys, games, or activities stereotypically used or engaged in by the other gender. Second, quote, a strong preference for playmates of the other gender. In other words, Zach, if you're a girl and you like NASCAR, red flag. If you're a boy and you like playing with girls, red flag. Do you see a problem with that? Yes or no?
I bet there's probably like 20 other things you didn't read there, right?
Well, I'll forward it to you. Well, I'll keep reading.
I think that it's too simplified.
But let's talk about those particular.
I'm sure I'll respond to that directly. I think that's too simplified. I mean, that's the thing. It's like,
but this is the diagnostic manual, so
but it's a tiny fraction of the diagnostic manual, right? Well, no psychologist is going to go, hey, do you like NASCAR? Do you like boys? Okay, you're a boy, not a girl. That's not how it's going to work.
Well, sadly, again, I'm going to continue. A strong dislike of one's sexual anatomy. I got to tell you, I was 7 years old.
There you go.
But I don't know how a 7-year-old has a conscious decision of whether they like or dislike their sexual anatomy.
But I think that the word that throws people off is it's not about sexuality. It's about their biological sexual anatomy.
Were you looking downstairs saying this is awesome?
I don't think
I wasn't. I didn't really have a view one way or the other.
Well, that's the point. It's a psychological condition where the person
but
who
a 7-year-old comes to you, Zach, and says,
"What about a 13-year-old?"
I don't. 13-year-olds they can't get tattoos.
But it's not the point. What do you mean?
Going through puberty, so I think most women going through puberty are going to have a strong dislike of the sexual anatomy that's causing the pain of puberty.
But I mean, look, what we're talking about here is kids and transgenderism. I could agree that 7-year-olds, just to paint where I stand on this, because I think it's important to do this. I am of the opinion that this sort of like transitioning a child, especially like a 7-year-old child, I'm extremely uncomfortable with the concept. However, I am the kind of person who is not interested in the government making that type of decision. I'm interested in medical professionals and parents making those decisions.
Medical
That's why
professionals have been wrong time and again.
but
It's
so
a
is the government.
previous.
And the government should not have a hand in this. It should not play. They should not play a
Well,
role. The only thing they should play a role in is setting like the most basic boundaries on what is possible. And I'm open
shut.
to a discussion where there are age limits. Like, I don't know what the proper age limit, but just to throw a number out there, 10-year-olds should not be getting transitional surgery. To me personally, that's a problem. However, if you get to, I use 13-year-olds for a reason, because that is when puberty begins, and you look down and you go, okay, how do I feel about this? And if the answer is I look
Most
down
girls
and this
don't feel
feels
good about their sexual
no,
anatomy.
but it's not about good. It's about, does it feel like this is right for? Is this right or wrong?
What kind of question even is that?
But that's the thing. This whole idea is the right doesn't understand the complexity of it. They're not willing to sit down and go, well, because you asked that question right there, because it doesn't. You can't fathom it because you don't have that problem. But it doesn't mean that problem doesn't exist for other people.
But okay, and I'll leave it on this point because there's so much here, and I do want to unpack this in a full proper episode, because it's important that we have this debate, because it's happening before our eyes, and I think it's affecting children. You would think in one way, I would think an entirely different way, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a permanent decision. It's irreversible.
Yes.
We should take that seriously, right, Zach?
Absolutely. I'm not saying it's not.
Well, I mean, okay. Removing your hysterectomy and removing your breasts is a permanent decision, right?
100%.
You lose sexual function, right?
Absolutely. This is why I think it's a serious topic. I think at the same time, though, what I'm curious from your perspective is, do you think this is a complicated topic? Because I do. But here's the thing, like this whole concept of, there's only two genders and the end. Obviously, the fact that is that the end for you? I mean, or are you open to the fact that this is a more complicated discussion?
I'm open to an intricate good faith discussion that is evidence-based, logic-based, and that reviews primary source documentation.
But wouldn't you argue that the primary organization that should determine whether or not this is a real thing or not would be the American Psychological Association?
No, because the American Psychological Association referred to homosexuality, something that needed to be, right? We know this, right? They refuted homosexuality as a mental disorder, right? They're on the record in the 1970s.
Yeah, in the 1970s. When was that?
No, but what I'm saying is,
years ago?
Look, medical professionals have an awful track record. They endorsed smoking. They endorsed the Tuskegee experiments. It goes on and on and on.
But this is the point of, over time, the reason people trust science and medicine is that they learn.
Transitioning kids wasn't a thing 5 years ago. It just wasn't a thing.
That doesn't make
it's
it
a
wrong.
New thing. We should be skeptical of new permanent.
Of course, I'm not saying we shouldn't be skeptical. We should be skeptical.
We agree that there's skepticism to be had here.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you something, and perhaps we'll end on this note, because I think this is very important. I know what your answer is going to be. And it's the same as my answer.
Let's see.
Should we debate this? Yes or no?
Oh, 100%.
Okay, that's all we should. Right? Because I'll tell you, Zach, folks on your side will say this is beyond debate. That having this debate is dangerous. A lot of people on the left on this particular issue will say, no, this is a settled issue. We're not going to debate it. And I'm glad, correct me if I'm wrong, that we have both skepticism and a willingness to earnestly debate this important issue. True or no true?
Sure. I mean, it's true with an asterisk on it. I have skepticism around what the boundaries should be in extreme circumstances. But outside of that, I have no skepticism about the fact that transgenderism is a real thing, that people go through this emotional challenge and they have a real issue with their own gender identity and they want to be seen as what they identify with. That is complex. And I'm not skeptical of that at all, even though it's complex. I am skeptical of the surgical transition of children at certain ages. But again, certain ages, I think that when you get to a teenage year where people are going through heavy levels of depression and high levels of suicide because they're not able to get the care that they need, that is when you need to look at it from the other side and going, well, how many people are you having end up pass away because you're restricting them from the medical care that they need that should be sanctioned to be able to be provided for them if their doctor and parent believe that it's correct and they all consent to it. The government should not be in a position there to go, no, I know that you have transgenderism. You feel like your gender identity is not correct. You want to transition. Everybody says yes, but then the government says no. I'm against that. I have no skepticism around that. The skepticism I have is solely with younger children and the decision-making process required to medically be able to do it, and from the governmental perspective, granting them that right. But I don't think the government should be in a position where they can just go, nope, can't do it. You're wrong. It doesn't work that way. I think that is a massive overreach. I think it has dangerous implications, not just for these people who are going to be suicidal or commit suicide because of those actions, but it also has dangerous implications across the board in terms of freedom for people's behavior in this country. So that, yes, with a major asterisk, we can debate it, and I have skepticism.
We can debate it, and like I take respectfully, I take issue with a lot of what you said. The suicide point, we're seeing a lot of folks who make these decisions, these permanent medical decisions, sadly turning to death by suicide because they feel like they're trapped, and they made a decision when they were 14, 15, 16, 17, that now that they're in their mid-20s and they want to have a real relationship and they want to have something special, they can't do that. And so there's a lot to be had there. There's an important point on consent there. There's a point on reversibility. The thing I keep hearing, though, and it's really concerning, is so much of it comes down to the social construct of gender, that a woman is supposed to act, behave, and like these certain things. And if she doesn't, she may actually be a man, and vice versa. I think we need to, can we agree that we need to reject that thinking that men and women are allowed to like, dress, feel, and act as they choose without feeling the need to become lifelong pharmaceutical patients to this industry?
Of course, but that's not the circumstances, right? I mean,
I happen to think it is, but I think we'll leave that for a longer debate,
right? Yeah.
And I'll leave it at this. There's a book called I Am Jazz. It's a children's book about Jazz Jennings, who is a trans-identifying individual. And in the children's book, it's read at Drag Queen Story Hour. Drag Queen Story Hour. Okay.
Totally fine by me.
That's fine. But that's fine to have that. I think it's inappropriate. That's okay. But what I will say is that in the opening pages of I Am Jazz, how does Jazz know she's always been a girl? She's never liked silver and always liked pink. That's how it's framed in a children's book.
Yeah, exactly. That's because it's a children's book. It's simple.
Hold on. Why are you exposing children to lifelong potential decisions on the basis of which or colors they're not predisposed to? I was never a big.
Does the book say you should?
I was never a big masculine guy growing up. I'm not really today. I walk into the gym occasionally. They got a good smoothie in there. I got to tell you the truth. I'm a gym smoothie. I'm a gym nut for this smoothie.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. You and I think we're good looking guys. Pause, the whole rest, no diddy. But in any event, Zach, pleasure as always, a good conversation. This was probably the most wide ranging we've had so far. 3 episodes.
Yeah, no, it's been great. And I'm excited for the one in person. It's going to be
I look forward to seeing you in Jacksonville in 2 weeks. We'll bring a lot of content from the sidelines of that, and have a great week.
Yeah, you too, man. I'm excited. Let's I think Jacksonville will be interesting, and I think it was our best debate yet. So I'm looking forward to the one in person, man. Have a good one.
It's gonna be a lot of fun. Thanks so much.